Hey, Ryan, thank you so much for taking the time for a quick chat today.
Yeah, no problem. Happy to be here.
So you're the founder and CTO of Infinite Album, and we're gonna get to this very soon. But before getting to this, I'd like to talk about your one of your first adventures as a founder, which was Diddy, which I think nowadays maybe you would have gone for a different name because of different reasons. But
Yeah.
can you tell a little bit about that, which was an AI music messaging app, right? Which gained a lot of traction, and you end up selling it to Google. Could you
Yeah.
tell a little bit about that story and how that led you to Infinite Album?
Yeah, absolutely. So we had been building an assisted composition app for a long time at that company. The company's name was Zaya, and the app was called Zaya. And we were just having a ton of trouble because we were finding that people were getting a bit of creative overload or decision overload because we had all these different tracks that you could add and you could choose producers and stuff like that. So at some point we thought, okay, let's rebuild this thing, but make it super streamlined. And we decided to focus just on lyrics and generating vocals on top of backing tracks, and that seemed to resonate with the more casual creators. And yeah, we were part of Facebook's Tray when the Messenger app came out on mobile. So just the same way you can add a GIF to something, you could add our musical messages, and you would just type text. You would select a song. We would synthesize the vocals with those lyrics, and then add them to these pre-made backing tracks that we had created ourselves, and then stream them down to your device and create a whole lyric video on top of it. So synchronize it with a lyric video. Yeah, and I think we were actually one of the first people ever to put VSTs in the cloud, like professional VSTs in the cloud, because we had some production pipeline there as well. And also, it took us years to get the licenses from the major labels to use content like Lady Gaga and The Weeknd and Sia, for example. So yeah, it was a bit of a pioneering app, I would say, a pioneering enterprise. And now we're like seeing all these issues come up again with all this music generation stuff.
And then a while later, you go on to co-found Infinite Album. How did this, which is you're going to explain well, but just basically developing large-scale soundtracks for streaming, for video games, right? How did that idea come about, and what were the main initial challenges that you had?
Yeah, definitely. I think the main idea was we wanted to build something with AI that humans couldn't do. That was kind of our basic premise. So a lot of people are using AI just to sort of scale music, and now we're actually seeing them enable, very very casual creators to create music and be creative with music, which I think there are a lot of benefits to that. Our focus really was, okay, AI can scale, but it also can make really quick decisions. So we were thinking, if you can teach an AI to compose music, you could have that music change dynamically based on what's happening. And then because of that, video games was the best use case, because you could get into a fight, on the drop of a hat in a video game, and then you need a very different musical setting for the fight rather than if you're like walking through the forest or something like that. So yeah, and that was really our goal, is because you can't have a band playing next to you when you're playing a game, adapting the music to what you're doing. So we also saw it as a huge opportunity for artists to release their music into the gaming ecosystem as well. So there's a sort of dual benefit to building a system like that.
I think some of the associations of changes in music according to the game are somewhat to be expected. So, for example, if I assume that if I don't know, a character dies, and there would be a sad song, or if there's a fight scene and there would be a more upbeat. But what are some of the more intrinsic changes in music style that potentially the general public would not notice, but that you guys have found to be very effective?
Hmm. It's a very good question. I think in the gaming context, there's quite a lot of effort put on sort of accenting gameplay with music. So this whole concept of stingers that happen basically at a particular event. So if you know when you pick up an item, or a good example is just even like when Mario hits a coin box, it has this very harmonic sounding cha-ching. Um, so yeah, I think there's an opportunity to integrate essentially all sound into the soundtrack of the musical background. So I think that's something that people don't really think about when they play games. They sort of just assume everything sounds good together, but there's quite a lot of thought put into that. For example, like I think Red Dead Redemption was a good example of a soundtrack that had a lot of dynamicism, and they actually composed everything in the same key signature so that everything would sound good together no matter what was triggered when. So that was sort of one of their hacks in doing that. But yeah, we've tried to integrate those techniques, that really the game composition techniques, into the engine so that you have all of this at your disposal and you can even customize it.
What are some of the key factors within the storytelling of the game that you use to code the music which is generated?
Hmm. Yeah, so we are limited by what data we have access to. And so part of the reason that we focused originally on the live streaming use case, so we originally built a product for streamers to play music while they play games on Twitch, essentially. And part of the reason we did that is because we could get access to the data of the game through this particular platform that we used called Overwolf. And so each game will actually expose different data parameters, like did you get a headshot, or did you heal somebody, or did you win a match, or did you die? So you have different sets of information from each game, and then we essentially map those primarily to emotional cues. So I think what's different about us as well is that we created this emotional space. In academia, it's called the valence arousal space, which means essentially arousal is essentially intensity, and valence is sad versus happy. And so you end up with this sort of like, ours is a circle, but it's basically a 2D graph. And in our system, you can put the emotion at any point in that graph, and the music will adapt and try to create music that is of that emotion, that specific emotion. And so what we do is we map these events in the game to this emotional space, but then you can also map it to instrument arrangement changes, like adding a bass or removing the drums, and you can also trigger just sound effects, those stingers, like I was talking about, so that you have more immediate things happening with the music. So yeah, I think that's really where we are unique, is that we've created this language to communicate between the storytelling and the music.
And that's something that you do in partnership with the game developers?
No, that's the nice thing about Overwolf, is that it's an open app platform, an app ecosystem that has already done the work to expose these data APIs essentially from the game. So what it means is that you have to be on the device that the game is being played on. And then it just communicates to your app and tells you what's going on in the game. And then you can make these changes, the musical changes, appropriately.
One of the things that I find fascinating about Infinite Album is the fact that you guys have been certified as fairly trained, right? Which is non-profit, founded by Ed Newton, and I think it's a very, very important debate, which a lot of people are not exactly aware of, and how this certification happens and what the process is. And for a consumer, how can they be really certain that the algorithm has been fairly trained? Could you talk a little bit about that and how the process was, and how you made the decision to seek that certification?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that Ed Newton Rex, he founded JukeDeck back in the day. So he's a pioneer in AI music generation. JukeDeck essentially was a cloud-based system that was building soundtracks. They also had an app on TikTok at one point, where you could generate music on for your videos. and you would actually sing in, and it would sort of like morph your voice a little bit. So yeah, and they ended up getting bought by TikTok. So and then after that, Ed Newton Rex was working at Stability, working on their AI music solution, Stable Audio. So he is very, very knowledgeable about this space. Stability actually were one of the first AI music companies to license music for their product. So they licensed a catalog of music to build their AI model, and that actually was pioneering in itself. And Ed just saw this opportunity to create some trust in the system, because there is quite a lot of fear, quite a lot of abuse of rights, I would say, in the AI training process. And yeah, so he's very knowledgeable about what sort of licenses each data set has, whether it's Creative Commons or copyleft, these types of things. And yeah, he was pretty rigorous about tracking down all of the potential sources of data that you've used. And it was a sort of we had a few rounds, I would say, of feedback where he was sort of digging into different things. And yeah, so I would say that it is very like the certification has value for sure. And
And how's
I think
exactly
you
the
have to be
process?
confident. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you. How is it exactly the process of certification?
Yeah, so he'll essentially he has a questionnaire that you fill out. He asks about all the models that you have developed and where you source your data, and then essentially vets all of those sources. Yeah, so it's pretty rigorous, I would say. It doesn't take, if you have like a system in place, it doesn't take a long time. So if you actually care about where you're sourcing your data, then it's not so hard. And we had already built our own internal system for tracking what data is in which model, because we actually use quite a wide variety of models in our system. So
Before starting the conversation, we were just talking about before that one of the goals for Infinite Album that you have achieved is um, licensing the music for streaming, for live streaming, right? Which is a very complex process. Could you talk a little bit about that, about copyrights and live streaming music?
yeah, definitely. So live streaming has this big problem of not being able to use copyrighted music the same way you get a strike on YouTube. Your videos can get strikes on Twitch, and the Twitch has like sort of notoriously never been willing to pay for a broad license to cover all of the music content on their service, partially because it's live streaming. So it's, unless you save the video, like only the people watching see it. So I think they sort of use that as a bit of a loophole. So yeah, we saw this opportunity specifically because anything that's AI generated can't be copyrighted. So therefore, you can't get a copyright strike on something that's AI generated. We saw that as an opportunity, and that's why we focused more on live streaming at first. And secondarily, it was challenging. We started in 2020, and even then, it was challenging to convince people of the transformative nature of AI. And I think that a lot has changed in the last 4 years. I think our long-term vision is to be integrated into video games, working with game developers and AAA studios, so that the music is much more adaptive and even customizable. Like our dream is basically that you can come in with your own listening profile and choose your own soundtrack as you're playing a game. Which I think it will happen at some point, regardless of who gets there first. So that was kind of our vision, but at the time, it made a lot more sense to go into live streaming and go to the consumer to show game developers that consumers are interested in customizing their music and having new music for the games that they play.
You mentioned that you started this initiative in 2020, and I imagine it must have been a busy year for you, because that was the year that you also started co-organizing the AI song contest.
Yeah.
So it's been 5 years now. Could you talk a little bit about the event and what are the main lessons learned? And one thing which I find interesting to hear from you is How have you seen the evolution of co-creation of musicians with algorithms for the AI song contest?
Yeah, yeah, it's been a fantastic ride, I would say. So we just had our fifth year of the contest last year. We hosted it in Zurich, and we've been moving every year. So we did it in originally in Amsterdam. We've done it in Spain, um, and yeah, so we move around quite a lot. And this year we're actually going to very likely be moving it back to Amsterdam the first time. So yeah, I think that in its first year, it was very interesting because it was started by this Dutch broadcasting company, actually VPRO, and they sort of wanted to create the Eurovision of AI. That was their original idea, and so they produced it, but they immediately came to ISMIR, which is the International Society for Music Information Retrieval. So it's a conference where all of essentially the best AI and music researchers go to this conference. It's the main one. I've been going there since like 2011, and yeah. So the producer came to the conference and was like, I don't really know how to do this. Like, I don't know the AI side of this. So can you people help me? And so I helped a little bit with the first year, but joined fully in the second year. And the first year was really a bunch of sort of research labs that were tinkering around. We had 13 teams. So if you didn't have an education in AI, or someone on your team that had a pretty strong education in AI and music specifically, you weren't really going to be able to create something that sounded good, essentially. Um, so since then, I think every year more and more tools have come out. So I think in 2022, we had something like 80 tools, and we just collected the information for this last year, and it was more like 200. So there's more and more companies that are creating tools for very specific parts of the process, whether it's like generating MIDI or generating a drum track based on your bass line, or synthesizing your voice, or translating your voice, your beatboxing into a beat or into an instrument. Um, so there's been all sorts of tools that have come out. And in the last year, especially, we've seen that there were much more people with just creative backgrounds, with no sort of technical backgrounds, who are actually able to compete in this contest, because there's so many tools available. So it's been quite a progression from sort of a very niche, academic oriented specialty to something that's actually accessible to artists and more creative types.
Are there a few examples that you could share of how people used or co-created with AI in any innovative way that caught your attention?
Yeah, there's quite a few. So our winner from, I believe, 2022 was your boy Hanoi, and he took traditional Thai instrument performance and used tone transfer to transform the sound of those instruments into more of a Western tonal palette, and made this sort of almost drum and bass type track with these top line of this Thai instrument. And what was cool about that is that the Thai traditional music has different scales and different tonalities than we have in Western tonal music. So he specifically used a tool that didn't require any sort of knowledge about scales in order to transfer those sounds over. And that sort of was one of the at the time a recent advancement in AI, that you could actually just transfer, the sound of one instrument to another. And you didn't need to have any knowledge. Like, the traditional way you would do it is essentially transcribe it into MIDI, and then like find an instrument that can synthesize that MIDI, and that would require scales and tonality that you might not have, or at least it would be facilitated. So that was a super interesting one. Additionally, there was a team in Korea that tried to teach a chatbot about a very Korean emotion called Han, which is sort of like collective nostalgia, I think, is sort of the basic idea of it. But apparently it's very well known in South Korea. But yeah, so they tried to teach this AI like what this emotion was, and then have it generate lyrics based on that emotion. And we've actually found that that is sort of an emergent thing from our contest as well, is a bit of sort of cultural representation and even cultural preservation. So one of our teams from the second place team in 2022 as well, I think, they were from the Galician region in Spain, and so they did a traditional Galician song and used AI to. They tried to teach AI like the Galician culture of music as well. Um, and yeah, they got second place in the whole contest. So we've seen a lot of cultural representation, and actually even last year, our winning team was from Chile, and they were using AI to try to create South American music. And because there's not enough data in of South American music that's been in the training set of these models, it was essentially producing garbage. So they said that they even had like caveman grunts at one point that were being output when they tried to do South American music. So they actually took a lot of these outputs and sort of collaged them together to create this South American anthem that actually did represent, you know, their culture. So they sort of repurposed this essentially bad output and made it something amazing. So yeah, there's been quite a few very interesting and creative opportunities, I think, that really only AI kind of provides.
That's really fascinating. So following on that, one of the things of which I'm most interested in is how we respond to artificial creativity. So I've done different experiments and so on, but having worked on the scene for so many years now, and of course that you're mostly involved in the bubble of people who are within the field, but how have you noticed the evolution of people's response to AI music, and perhaps beyond the tech bubble?
Yeah, it's very interesting. A lot of people, there's a certain percentage of people that have almost always have a knee-jerk reaction against AI being creative specifically, which I totally understand, because I feel like we feel that that is something that's very human and shouldn't be able to be reproduced by a machine. Um, and so you definitely have that demographic, and we still have that demographic of people that are just, I don't want anything to do with it, and they sort of hate anything creative with AI. I think that over the years, that group has gotten a bit smaller, and there definitely is a huge group of people who are artists who are looking at this as an opportunity to differentiate themselves and also to challenge their own creative process, which I think there is a huge opportunity there, because this tech, it really is transformative. I know it's an overused word, but it really is transformative. It does things that we've never seen or been capable of doing with technology before. And because people are excited about this, there are tons of companies who are doing it the right way, who are fairly trained certified, who are focusing on a very specific problem within music. And so now we have, you know, hundreds of startups that have come out who are building these tools for musicians just to sort of streamline their creativity, to create new sonic opportunities. So I think we're moving towards a space where AI is just going to be part of your creative process, kind of regardless whether you're using it for mastering or for synthesizing instruments or for, I mean, we even had autotune for 25 years now. So that's not exactly AI, but it's a similar impact to what AI can do. So I think eventually we're going to find that AI is just a part of everybody's process, because there's so many tools that are valuable that are out there to use.
And that's a great link to the other point, which I'd like to know your opinion on, which is the flood of creativity, or the flood of artificial creativity. I was
Yeah.
last September, there was the AI Music Creativity Conference. It was in Oxford last September, and that was one of the main topics that was discussed, exactly as you were mentioning before, there's so many new tools coming up and so many different possibilities, and there is a financial incentive for users to produce at scale, right? So what that leads is an overwhelming amount of AI generated creative content online, not just in music. And this sort of aligns with a topic that has been more and more discussed, which is the dead internet theory, which is this idea that the amount of content online generated autonomously by AI, especially now with the developments of AI agents, it's going to be so overwhelming that it will really dilute the human input, and we're not going to be unable to distinguish what is genuine human expression and what isn't, which is something just produced at scale for financial incentives. How do you see this future potential, but likely scenario of an abundance of AI generated content where which dilutes human made ones and also dilutes or potentially influences human interaction online? How
Hmm.
do you see this? Should we control? Should there be regulation? Should it be not? Should the virtual space be an open space for all forms of creativity? How do you see this coming
Yeah,
scenario?
yeah, it's definitely a huge problem, I think. This is one of the things that I think the EU AI Act actually gets right, which is they have a requirement that if you are creating generated content, you have to label that content and let the person consuming the content know in some way that it was generated. And I think that honestly, I think should just be a law around the world. Like we should have the ability to discern whether something's real or not. Um, and I think we're in a very particular time right now. I'm relatively optimistic for the long term, even despite political things that are going on in certain parties. That shall remain nameless. Um, I think there's a huge push right now to buy into the hype, and that hype is funding all of these companies who are then creating more hype about artificial general intelligence and AI taking over essentially, and creating protections around the stuff that they're themselves building. Um, I don't think we're there yet, thankfully, but we are definitely in the era of fake content. I think that's a bigger problem at the moment, is that you can generate videos, you can impersonate people, you can generate music now. So yeah, I'm optimistic that in the long term, like we've already seen social media networks come out that are saying we don't have any AI generated content on our system, and we check. And thankfully there are ways to check. You can build AI models that detect generated content in pretty much all mediums. It's a bit of a rat race. It's like a cybersecurity issue, kind of, because new models come out. Like for example, when you first could generate videos, you could detect that it was a generated video because the person didn't blink. But obviously, now our generated videos have people who blink. So it's a bit of a cat and mouse game with new emerging technologies and detecting the new emerging technologies. But yeah, I think it should absolutely be labeled. I think it should. I think the copyright systems are kind of failing us a little bit right now, because we're just consuming this content. People are uploading it to Spotify. I mean, Spotify's tuning into it, obviously, but there's tons of generated tracks that are being uploaded. Deezer is actually a good example. They're the streaming service in France, and they actually built a music generated music detection tool, and put out a report saying that they have like 10,000 songs every day that are being uploaded specifically from Suno and Udio. So yeah, I mean, it also relates to all this whole idea of fair use, which is what Suno and Udio are claiming, that they have the right to use all of copyrighted music to train their models. And part of the argument is that it's not impacting the market, which is, to me, nonsense, because we're just getting flooded with AI generated music. And CSAC put out a report recently, which is the umbrella rights group in Europe, saying that they're going to lose something like 25% of the music industry is going to be lost to generated music. So yeah, it definitely is a big problem. I think part of the problem is that the lay person, like just a regular music consumer, generally won't notice in particular use cases. So like if you're walking through a mall, for example, I don't think people are going to notice whether or not it's AI generated music or just regular human created music. So I think there's going to be a lot of use cases that are just supplanted with AI generated music, which is a big issue. And it's interesting because it puts a flashlight on our current system of compensation for artists as it is. I think all artists are already not happy with how little they get compensated for streaming, or for other things that are art related. So I think it's already very hard to be an artist, and it's going to be a little bit harder, especially in situations like background music and music synchronization. I think anything like if you're soundtracking a video for YouTube where music is not the main focus, I think it's going to be hard to be an artist who creates that type of music in the
Any
future.
low involvement context, right? Like
Exactly.
very complex. Ryan, to finish up, I have just 3 quick fire questions to ask you.
Sure.
The first one is in times of AI, what makes human creativity unique?
Yeah. Well, I think that people don't really like content that is just fully generated. Like I don't think it's better at this point. I don't think it will ever really be better unless a human at least curates it intensively or modifies it to the point where they're adding their own creativity. And this is what the Copyright Office is sort of struggling with right now. For example, they just approved for copyright a piece of art that was, all of the pieces were fully AI generated, but they carved out sections of an image and regenerated them and did in painting, and extended them around the image. So there were something like 36 edits, and they said that was enough human intervention to copyright that particular work. And if you look at the side by side, obviously the image is much, much better than it was when it was originally generated. So there is some level of human effort that I think needs to be made still today, and I think in the future it will still need to be made with future tools. And I think that art is really more about art is not just about the artifact. Art is about the process. It's about the person. It's about the voice and the thought process of that person, and the meaning behind what they're doing and why they're spending their time doing it. So I'm a little optimistic that that art will still be valued. Art that comes from humans will still be valued quite a lot higher than AI generated art, and hopefully that still means that artists can have careers.
What message would you leave to creators that are concerned or skeptical because of the rise in AI in creative sectors?
I think there's definitely things you can do, like opt-out frameworks are kind of BS, to be honest, but you still need to do it with your content. The problem is that people can still scrape from like Spotify, so like the act of releasing your content is a bit risky, and you can kind of assume that you're going to get your music trained on an AI. So I would say I would focus more on finding your audience and finding the people that you connect with, because like I said, it's already hard you can't make a living really off of streaming these days anymore. So it's not just going to be this sort of like broadcast relationship where people are just passively listening to you without even knowing you. You really need to cultivate your own audience and be interacting with your audience, I think. And that's still going to remain true. in this whole era of AI, and it probably will become even more important for people to connect with the artists that they're listening to. So,
And Ryan, to really finish up, what are excuse me, what are three artists that have most influenced you in life? Doesn't have to be AI related, but which three artists have most influenced you?
yeah, I think more recently, I mean, Stevie Wonder is probably my favorite composer of all time. Composer performer, he's just crazy talented. Yeah, so more recently, I think Jacob Collier is just an inspiration. He's a type of musician who has dedicated all of his time to learning more about music, learning more instruments. And he's one of the only artists, or not only, but he's one of those artists that really is not only virtuosic in his instrumental performance, but also able to cross the gap into technical savvy as well. So he produces all of his own music, records and produces all of his own music in his studio at home, and then creates these crazy videos that are like would essentially crash your laptop if you tried to open the project. And then created his own show where I was able to see one of his early shows where he did a solo show where he was playing every single instrument and just looping things like crazy. And at that time, he even was building a keyboard that could split his voice into 5 different voices. And he worked with MIT to build his own instrument. And now actually he has his own guitar as well. That is a unique tuning, a 5-string guitar, which normally you have 6 strings. So I think his ability to completely understand music from every perspective, whether it's harmony or vocals or bass or guitar or piano or this or rhythm, polyrhythms, he's super into them. Yeah, so he's just like one of those super inspiring artists that I think is sort of once in a generation. So I think more recently that he's definitely an inspiration. I'm not sure how much he's influenced my music character, I would say, or my music personality, but certainly he's something to aspire to in terms of being an expert in your craft. I would say I would do want to give one AI one, which is DataBots. They're just similarly so innovative. They were the first ones to create an infinite stream of AI generated music, and they did it with like death metal, and that was running on YouTube for 5 years straight, where it was just generating new music. So they're so forward thinking in terms of formats and all of this sort of ecosystem of AI artifacts that get created. They're just constantly thinking about these things. For example, like they just went on tour and were generating music as they did their sets. And then at the end of it, they would download it to a USB drive and start throwing the USB drives into the audience. So, like, it's like the nerdy tech bro version of smashing your guitar at the end of the performance. So yeah, they're on the top of the game right now, I would say. And then just more personally, I think Wolfpack is one of my favorites as well. And they actually had like similarly creative things more in the legal space. Like their first album was called Sleepify, and they encouraged everybody to just run it overnight, and it was completely silent. So they were generating royalties from silent tracks that they had released as an album, and they generated like 20 grand worth of royalties, and were able to do their first tour because of it. So that's actually I was playing Sleepify when they first came out, but then they actually have turned it into this whole like giant, I guess, corporation of music, because now all of their individual artists have their own careers, like Corey Wong, blanking on the other guy's name, but yeah, they basically all created their own new bands at some point, and they still tour together. But yeah, their music is just great, and it's kind of ironic because it's very analog. It's very old school funk, analog type music, and my personal preferences are actually much more in that space, even though my entire career has been dedicated to like music generation and new formats and new sounds. So yeah, I think both back would be my third choice.
Ryan, thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, it's great to talk. And thanks for organizing.